Hello, my name is Nicole Nimmons. I am the Community Education and Outreach Coordinator for the YWCA Spokane. Thank you so much for hopping on today. In the spirit of working remotely and practicing social distancing, I wanted to just do a really brief video on a pretty big topic that is oftentimes talked about within the community, that you may have heard yourself, that you may have said yourself, and that is oftentimes a huge misconception within the community, so that hopefully my end goal at the end of this video is to give you hopefully some further insight onto this topic, so that we can approach survivors and victims of intimate partner violence with more empathy and more grace, because in this process it is a difficult one for them, and the last thing that we need to be doing is making them feel further alone. However, before I start talking about this topic, I did want to just briefly mention that some of the things I do talk about in this very brief video may be triggering for some. So if you do feel like you need to talk to a confidential advocate at any point, feel free to give our 24-hour helpline number a call. It's 509-326-2255, or if email would be better for you, it's help@ywcaspokane.org. Otherwise, just make sure you take care of yourself, okay? So back to the topic. What is the big topic, right? The big topic is, why does somebody stay? Why do they go back? Why do they put up with that? Why don't you just leave? So this topic alone is a pretty big topic to cover in a brief amount of time, but I just want to give you some really basic insight on it, okay? This is a hard topic for especially people that have a loved one in your life. You're really, really close to the person, whether they're your daughter, your son, your mom, your dad, a cousin, a best friend. If you have a really close loved one in your life, for you to be able to watch this other person be able to go back multiple times or not actually leave, or for that person to come to you and say that they're ready to leave, they can't deal with this anymore, the abuse has gotten too much, and then the next week come back and it wasn't really that bad, or I was actually, I was fabricating some of it, or it really wasn't as bad as what it seemed to be, or, I really love this person. There's a lot of reasons as to why I'm with this person. It's really hard for people in that situation when you have an emotional investment in somebody to watch them suffer in that way, right? And so the easiest thing for us to do in our own minds is to say, okay, well, if you just do A, B, C, D, E, you should be able to leave. It should be that easy. I was able to do it. I did those various things, these various steps, and I was able to leave just fine. Or for somebody else, I was able to watch Susie and Joe. They did it last year, and they were able, to leave just fine. And now look at them. They're happy. They're healthy. They have, a healthy relationship. They have a dog and golden retriever and 2 kids. I don't know. But, if you just do these various steps, you'll be able to get out just fine. Well, it's a hard place to be in, because unless you're walking in that person's exact shoes down to the T, you can't actually say those type of things, because everybody's relationship is different. Everybody's dynamic is different. Everybody's abusive partner is different than another person's, right? And every abusive partner is different. They have different capabilities as maybe another abusive partner. So, and frankly, there's also different barriers, right? Everybody's situation is different. They have different barriers depending on their situation they have, their relationship that they have going on. So I would challenge you to not ask those questions, and I'll give you as some more context as to why, okay? So let me give you more of a visual. So why does someone stay? Why don't you just leave? Someone is 70 times more likely to be murdered in the weeks following leaving than at any other time in that relationship. To me, that's a pretty good reason as to why somebody stays or goes back, right? Because that danger increases dramatically, because that control factor that the abusive partner had over the other person is now being threatened. So their way of dealing with that is by getting more physically violent, either with weapons or not. But it definitely increases the chances of somebody being murdered and a homicide happening. Or murder-homicide, right? Murder-suicide. There's also abusive parents are more likely to seek sole custody of the shared children, even if they didn't want them in the first place. and abusers went unsupervised custody and visitations at the same rates as non-abusers. So this is a pretty interesting one. We often would like to think that just because somebody's abusing me, that the commissioner, the judges should be able to see right through it in the custody hearing and should be able to grant the children to myself in that example, right? But the reality is, let's say you did escape as a victim or survivor. You did escape from that household. Well, the abuser comes in. Maybe they have the only job. Maybe they have the car. Maybe they have the house. They have the money, means there's no evidence against them in any way, shape, or form in regards to this case. Maybe they were able to afford an attorney. You come in, you barely have the clothes on your back. You have no money because maybe you weren't allowed to work. You have no dwelling for the kids to have. You're sleeping on, let's say, Joe's couch for the past 3 weeks. You don't have maybe even a driver's license because maybe your perpetrator cut it up or burned it, or birth certificates or what have you. You don't seem like somebody that is able to care for these kids in a holistic level. And while you're probably the person that the kids should go to, the commissioner really only can base it off of what they see in front of them. And otherwise, it's going to be this person said this against this person. It's not going to be something where they can just believe one person or another unless there's evidence involved, right? So oftentimes, visitation and supervised custody, and ultimately custody in general, ends up being rewarded to the perpetrators and or the abusers because they have no other reason to not see that they're fit parents. And then once the kids go to them, what ends up happening to the victim or the survivors, they end up ultimately going back because they want to make sure that the abuse is not happening to those kids, and that they can make sure that some of it can be redirected towards them and they can take more care of them. So, those are pretty good reasons as to why somebody doesn't leave or why somebody goes back. But of course, there's so many more. Let's see if I can get to the next screen here. Okay, so lack of awareness of services. How many of y'all out there thought we were the YMCA, right? Thought we had a pool and fitness equipment. And while I would love to say we have an awesome pool in our side of the building, it is not the case. We do share a building with YMCA, but we actually are not the same in regards to affiliation. So we are not the YMCA, but we do have other awesome services. Fear of retaliation by the abuser. Just how it sounds, right? What will they do? Will they get me fired from my job? Will they take away my kids? Will they damage my vehicle? Will they vandalize my house? What will they do? Will they go after my partner that is currently with me? Will they try to hurt my family? Lack of financial resources. Again, what I had just previously mentioned, in that relationship, if the abuser was the primary breadwinner and you weren't allowed to have a job or weren't needing to have a job, and that person was the only person that was making any income, how are you going to pay for anything, right? How are you going to pay for a house or food, the car if you were allowed to drive? How are you going to be able to make ends meet? Fear of losing custody of the shared children or increased abuse on the kids, just how I previously mentioned in the previous slide. Fear of not being believed. That's a humongous one. If I do come forward, is anybody going to actually believe me? Especially in cases where the abuser is more on a higher, maybe held up in like this pedestal, right? Held to higher standards within the community. Maybe a very well-known person, such as a public official or what have you, that is held up on this pedestal. If I was to come forward, is anybody actually going to believe me? Because it's going to be their word against mine. So what's the point? If I actually come forward, it could actually do more damage than good. Fear for household pets. There's a lot of torture that can happen to household pets, or killing of them, and ultimately it could be seen as your fault as to why it happened in the first place. And that's why you try to minimize the chances of that happening. Religious, family, and societal pressures. Maybe this is the best relationship that your family has seen that you've ever been in. Maybe the most stable, or maybe your abuser has more financial stability than you've ever had before. And, maybe it's something where you're getting to a certain age in your life and you just don't want to keep getting out of relationships, and you want, it's good most of the time. They're good to you most of the time, and they love you and they care about you in a lot of really great ways, and so you want to stay in that relationship, right? And religious pressures, of course, for some people can be a big deal too. If there's a lot of religious abuse that is happening in that dynamic, making you feel like divorce is a sin, and you stay in a relationship, and till death do us part, right? So depending on how far you take that as well. Shame and guilt, of course, in regards to always making you feel like you're at fault and you did something wrong. Denial of seriousness of abuse, or belief that the abuser will change. This is a huge aspect of it, because that's where a lot of times we tend to see the cycle of violence, where somebody will continuously get abused, and then go back to that person because that person manipulates them and gaslights them and makes them feel like it could have all been avoided in the first place, but they were sorry and that it won't happen again. This type of thing happens all the time. And so through that process, one week they might feel like they need to leave, and the next week they might feel like it's not actually as bad as what it seemed, and they came to their senses and they don't want that person leaving their life anymore. That could also be the situation where somebody gets a protection order one week and a week later wants it dropped. That is very, very common. It's because they've gone most likely through a cycle of violence where they've had time to really think about leaving the person, and maybe the different barriers they might run into, or whether it's increase in danger or lack of financial resources or what have you. And they've had time to think about the repercussions behind leaving, and they change their mind. Think that they can change them or know them best. Lack of support network. How isolated was this person, or has this person been from their friends and family, coworkers? Do they have any network if they ended up needing it? And a lot of times victims and survivors don't. And even their loved ones end up leaving because they're tired of them, for lack of better terms, crying wolf, right? And they just want them to leave, and they don't understand why they won't. And so they just get tired of themselves and they walk away. So if they don't have any support network, how do they ultimately get out? Cultural and ethnic and racial barriers. That goes a lot of times with cultural abuse, especially if the victim and or survivor is non-English speaking. That also can make a lot of issues as well. Lack of available community resources and programs. Even though the YWCA and other programs in our community are wonderful resources, we can't do it all. And while we would love to say, come to us and we'll just solve all the problems, that's just ultimately not what can happen in most cases, because we have lack of resources as well in regards to how many people we can serve. We do see a lot of people weekly, and you probably would be surprised how many people we talk to in person or over the phone, and we just can't make all of those resources extend so drastically that we're able to just solve all problems for everybody, but we definitely try our very best. And love them invested in the relationship. They have to have something there in order to really end up wanting to stay or feeling like they need to stay with that person. And loving is definitely a huge part of that. And oftentimes they say love is blind, and we try to just focus on the more positive things versus the negative things, and just focus on the good times, right? And of course, there's many, many other reasons, but you can imagine how just even having a few of those barriers, how hard it may be for somebody to leave, right? Imagine walking in those shoes of just even a few of these, pick out 5 of them off of the screen, and how difficult it would be for you to navigate through that. And oftentimes, a lot of times, victims and their survivors, they say it was sometimes, in some cases, easier for them to go back than to deal with everything on the outside, because there's just too many barriers in the process. So ultimately, when we're asking these questions of why not just leave, why do you go back? Why do you put up with that? We're ultimately victim blaming, and we don't even realize we're doing it. And while we're victim blaming, we are ultimately not supporting the victim. We're not supporting the survivor, and we're not holding the perpetrator accountable. And ultimately, we need to be holding that person accountable, because otherwise, we're just further emboldening that perpetrator to keep doing what they're doing to the victim or survivor. And we're not helping the survivor in any way, making them feel empowered through that process, or that it's not their fault in the first place. So I challenge you to, really recognize that within yourself. I challenge you to, if the first thing in your head is, why don't they just leave? Why do they put up with that? flip the switch, right? You know, it should be not about why the victim doesn't leave, but why the perpetrator or the abuser feels like they can lay their hands on them or treat them that way or do these different things to the victim. You know, it should be about the perpetrator, not about the victim, right? In this type of situation. And by holding the perpetrator more accountable and the abuser, we're ultimately going to be supporting the victim and or survivor in the long run more holistically and the way that they need to be supported. So that was just a really, really brief overview of various reasons why somebody may stay or may go back, and what victim blaming, what it ends up leading to, which is ultimately victim blaming. So ultimately, if you or somebody that you know is going through anything that you want to talk to advocates on our helpline, our 24-hour helpline, give us a call, again, 509-326-2255. Give us an email, help@ywcaspokane.org. Whether you're ready to leave, not ready to leave, have no intention on leaving, we can help through that process. We will empower you to find your own way to determine what you need from us, what you need to do next. We serve men, women, non-binary, LGBTQ plus community, and it's completely free and confidential services all the way across the board. I encourage you, check out the other videos on this page from my other fellow coworkers and advocates. They're awesome, so please get some more information. There is some frequently asked questions on the page, as well as some resources to check out in videos. So thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you later.